So in our second of our series this summer on those characters in the Bible that are sometimes overlooked, lesser known, we have for us this day Queen Vashti. Queen Vashti also comes to us from the Old Testament, from the book of Esther. And when I was thinking about this, as I was going through some of the work with this, I realized the first chapter of the book of Esther, you may be familiar with the whole kind of story or the synopsis of Esther, and I'll go over that in a minute. But the first chapter, I think people treat like a prologue or a preface. How many of you will get a book, you'll buy a book, now I guess they're on e-readers, right? Download it. And there's a preface, right? But you're like, you just like swipe right through that, right? And you go straight into the story. But often, the prologue or the preface is what sets us up for the rest of the story. And that's what the first chapter in Esther does for us. It sets us up for the rest of the story. The rest of the story of Esther is about a young woman who then becomes queen in Persia as the Israelites are now in exile. When we did Nehemiah, if you think back to Nehemiah, that time of exile, that's when all of this happens. So they've been taken from their home country, now in a new country. They're exiles, they're foreigners. And so in that kind of scenario, there are casts of characters that don't always appreciate that the Jewish people are living there now. And they have to somehow assimilate into the culture. So Esther, a young Jewish woman, ends up becoming queen of Persia. And by doing so, she is put in a place that has her ending up saving all of her people. Because there are bad characters in the book of Esther who want to annihilate the Jewish people. And so Queen Esther ends up being in a position where she's able to save all of her people, even taking risks herself in going before the king and requesting that her people not be slaughtered. And so that is that story. But to get to that story, to get to the place where Queen Esther would even be in a place to do that, you need to understand the story of Queen Vashti. So I'm going to read the scripture. I'm going to read it from here because there's long paragraphs of names that I've eliminated so that we can get through it and not have me stumble over those. So this is what happens in the preface, in the prologue. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and the governors of the provinces were present, while he displayed the great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and the pomp of his majesty for many days, 180 days in all. Okay, so here's what's happening. The king decides in his 3rd year of his reign to throw an enormous celebration with plenty of pomp and circumstance for all of his governors, the army. So literally, he shuts the government down for 180 days and says, hey, let's party. And that is exactly what they do for 180 days. Now, in reality, this was probably hyperbole. This was a bit of an exaggeration, 180 days. But in likelihood, he did shut the government down for a while and just had everybody over for a big, big day, week-long party. So after the 180 days of partying, when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days in the court garden of the king's palace. So now they've had 180 days. Now they're going on a 7-day bender, just the people in the city. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings tied with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement with marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Drinks were served in golden goblets, goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Drinking was by flagons, which is a pitcher. So goblets, get those out of here. We're going to drink out of the pitchers without restraint. For the king had given orders to all the officials in his palace to do as each one desired. Furthermore, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women at the palace of the king. So there's this now 7-day party on the tail end of the 180-day party, where the king has invited everyone from the city now to come. And his party is actually for the men. And so his queen throws another probably tea party for the women. So the women are off doing their party thing. The men are separated doing their party thing, all within the city. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, as you can imagine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who attended him to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing the royal crown. The Hebrew translation is wearing nothing but the royal crown. In order to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. But Queen Vashti refused to go at the king's command. At this, the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. Then the king consulted the sages who knew the laws. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of the king conveyed by the eunuchs? Then Memucan said in the presence of the kings and the officials, not only has Queen Vashti done wrong to the king, but also to all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For this deed, the queen will be made known to all women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands, since they will sing, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, noble ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard the queen's behavior, will rebel against the king's officials, and there will be no end of the contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let the royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be altered, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, vast as it is, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. I know, guys, you're going to really like this part. This advice pleased the king and the officials, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, to let everyone know in their own language, declaring that every man should be master in his own house. See, I knew you guys were going to like that part, right? You might not like the rest, though. Yeah. So the king throws this lavish party for days, weeks on end. Then another little party after that. And everyone is merry with wine. And then he decides to have his queen come before them wearing nothing but her crown. and she says no. She says no. She stands up to power. Imagine how difficult that is. Even in our own daily lives, every day we're making choices between the things that we would like to do, the things that we feel are right to do, and sometimes we feel cornered into doing things that we never intended, that we didn't want, that we feel poorly about. And it's hard to stand up and say no to power. Now, a lot of times, preachers will want to say that this is a story about just feminism. It's not. It's about those who are oppressed. It's about those who don't have standing, in whatever form that is. Yes, throughout the decades, women have had to fight for rights. We weren't always equal in the law, and we've had to fight that way to it. But there's others who are also in the margins, other places where other peoples are oppressed by regimes, oppressed by economies. This is their story as well, about being able to have the courage to stand up to power. Now, that seems like it wouldn't have anything to do with us, because, frankly, we are the ones with the power. But I imagine and I think about that image of that young man in Tiananmen Square. Do you remember that one? Way back when China was trying to show its might, and he stands right in front of a tank. That's courage. That's standing up to power. That then helped transform little by little things that change because one person stood up. I thought about how, so Vashti's there standing up to power and saying no. And I thought about how we have those conversations with our kids. Well, when your kids come to you and they say, you know, I want to do this with so-and-so, and you're like thinking, that's not a good idea, right? And they're like, yeah, but Jimmy gets to. And then you say, yeah, if Jimmy was going to jump off a cliff, are you going to go with him? So we try to come up in our own minds about how we get to the place where we're thinking about the thing that we want to do that we know probably isn't good for us, and how we kind of talk ourselves into that. But what Vashti does in this moment of courage, now after this, she takes a huge risk, right? She's banished from the kingdom. She's left bereft, most likely. She's now probably living in a homeless situation. She has no power, she has no wealth, she has nothing, and especially a woman in that culture, you have to be under the household of a man. So she has literally nothing but her freedom. But if she had not done that, it would never have paved the way for Queen Esther to do what she did. See, even in our small acts, because that seems like it's a one thing that Vashti did. She just said no. Seems like kind of a small act, and she pays the price. It doesn't seem like it changed anything, right? And yet, it led the way for everything to change. In the picture in the bulletin, it shows Vashti dancing alone. I dance alone. It shows her freedom that she has from making this courageous decision. I thought about that courage. And I thought about even our own daily actions. How do each of our simple daily actions, how can that affect what happens next? How can that open a way for others to hear the gospel? How can that open the way for others to know hope and joy? Even in our smallest actions, if we act kindly to someone else, we don't know how that kindness will then transform their lives into something different. We don't know. Vashti didn't know how her standing up to power was going to change things along the way. We don't know how our actions will open up avenues for God to come sweeping in and to transform lives of others. Vashti, for us, is a symbol of courage. She is a symbol of the way that God uses each of us. We are all Vashtis in a sense, because God can use each and every one of us, even in our smallest acts of kindness and forgiveness, our acts of mercy and grace. Even in those, God can use that to pave a way so that someone might be in the position to do something remarkable. This is God's word for us this day. Amen.